morning in 1992, a young nun's lifeless body was found at the bottom of a convent well in Kerala, India. At just 21 years old, Sister Abhaya had her whole life ahead of her, a life dedicated to faith, service, and education. But her untimely death was no ordinary tragedy. What began as a mysterious disappearance quickly unraveled into one of India's most complex murder investigations, stretching over 28 years and involving shocking betrayals, hidden secrets, and the persistence of a petty thief who refused to stay silent. Was it an accident, a suicide, or a cold-blooded murder hidden behind the walls of a place meant for peace? The truth would take decades to uncover. But when it finally emerged, it sent shockwaves through the nation. The town of Kottayam, Kerala, is a place many would describe as serene. Nestled in the lush greenery of southern India, it's a community deeply rooted in faith, with churches and convents standing as pillars of daily life. Among these, the St. Pius X convent held a special reputation. A haven for young women pursuing education and spiritual growth, it was a place where quiet prayers mingled with the laughter of students preparing for their futures. But beneath the surface of this tranquility, something sinister was brewing, something that would shatter the peace and forever stain the convent's sacred walls. In March 1992, the convent bustled with its usual routine. Young women, many of them nuns in training, studied for their upcoming exams, supported one another, and prayed together. Among them was Sister Abhaya, a 21-year-old nun described by her peers as kind, diligent, and deeply committed to her faith. Abhaya had come to St. Pius X with dreams of serving God and helping others, embodying the purity and hope that the convent promised. On the evening of March 26th, everything seemed normal. The nuns gathered for their evening prayers, shared a meal, and retired to their rooms, each focused on the tasks of the coming day. Abhaya was no different. Determined to do well on her exams, she set her alarm for 4 a.m., planning to wake up early for some extra study time. Her roommates noted nothing unusual, just another quiet night in a place dedicated to serenity and devotion. But by dawn, the tranquility was shattered. As the other nuns woke up, they noticed something strange. Sister Abhaya was missing. Initially, there was no sense of panic. After all, it wasn't uncommon for someone to be up early, perhaps praying or helping in the kitchen. However, when her friends went looking for her, they found unsettling signs. The kitchen was in disarray. A water bottle lay on its side, its cap open. Water was spilled across the floor, and one of Abhaya's slippers was left behind. As they searched further, their unease grew. The search led them outside, where they found her other slipper near the convent's well. With growing dread, one of the nuns peered into the dark water. What she saw would haunt her forever. Floating lifeless in the well was Sister Abhaya. The nuns' cries echoed through the convent, piercing the morning air. The fire department was called, followed by the police. Soon the quiet convent was swarming with officers and onlookers, their faces etched with shock and confusion. How could such a tragedy occur in a place meant for peace? The initial reaction from the authorities only deepened the mystery. Local police officer V.V. Augustine arrived at the scene, documenting the case as part of routine procedure. He took photographs, filed a report, and sent Sister Abhaya's body for an autopsy. However, even in those early hours, something felt off. There were whispers among the nuns, doubts in the air. Abhaya wasn't the kind of person to end her own life. Why would she wake up early, set an alarm, and begin her day, only to take such a drastic step? The open water bottle, the scattered items in the kitchen, and the slipper near the well painted a picture not of despair, but of urgency and struggle. The autopsy report added another layer of confusion. While the official cause of death was listed as drowning, the doctors noted injuries on her head and body, cuts and bruises that couldn't be easily explained. Yet these findings didn't align with the conclusion of suicide that the authorities seemed eager to present. Whispers of foul play began to spread, not just within the convent, but throughout the town and eventually the entire state of Kerala. This wasn't just the tragic death of a young nun. This was the beginning of a decades-long battle for justice, one that would expose hidden truths and test the resolve of everyone involved. The St. Pius X convent, once a symbol of peace, was now at the center of a storm. As news of Abhaya's death spread, the community demanded answers. How could such a horrific incident occur under the watchful eyes of the convent? Who was responsible? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, why did it seem like someone was trying to hide the truth? The stage was set for a mystery that would span nearly 3 decades, revealing secrets that no one could have imagined. As the sun rose higher that fateful morning, the convent that once brimmed with prayers and serenity now buzzed with shock and unease. Sister Abhaya's lifeless body had been retrieved from the well by local authorities, and the scene around the convent was one of chaos and confusion. Friends and mentors who had shared meals with her just hours before were now grappling with the devastating reality of her death. Tears flowed, prayers were whispered, but above all, there was a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. When Officer V.V. Augustine arrived, he treated the case as a routine incident. His report was cursory, focusing only on the immediate details. He documented the kitchen, where the water bottle lay with its cap open, the spilled water glistening on the floor like a silent witness. Abhaya's belongings, a lone slipper, her books left untouched, told a story of a young woman interrupted mid-thought. He ordered the body to be sent for an autopsy, seemingly unfazed by the subtle inconsistencies that others couldn't ignore. The autopsy findings added to the mystery. While the official cause of death was listed as drowning, the report noted injuries that raised serious questions. Abhaya had bruises on her body and a head injury, details that didn't fit the narrative of a simple drowning. Despite this, the case was tentatively ruled as a suicide. But why would a dedicated young nun, full of life and purpose, set an early alarm to study, only to take her own life mere hours later? The explanation didn't sit well with anyone who knew her, and it certainly didn't align with the evidence, or lack thereof. As whispers of doubt grew louder, activists, journalists, and even members of the local community began to suspect foul play. The convent, once a sanctuary, now seemed to house unanswered questions and dark secrets. The spilled water, the open fridge door, and the hurried way her body was found, it all pointed to a struggle, not a planned act of self-harm. And yet, the authorities appeared reluctant to pursue these inconsistencies, choosing instead to push the case toward a quick conclusion. Meanwhile, murmurs of a cover-up began to circulate. Activists and locals couldn't ignore the glaring anomalies. Why had evidence like Sister Abhaya's clothes and personal items been destroyed so hastily? Why were the nuns and staff at the convent so tight-lipped, unwilling, or perhaps unable to share crucial details? These lingering questions turned what could have been a closed case into a smoldering fire of suspicion and speculation. Leading the charge was activist Joan Punya Parakil, who refused to let Sister Abhaya's death be swept under the rug. He formed an action committee calling for a thorough investigation and justice for the young nun. His efforts struck a chord with the people of Kerala, who rallied behind the cause. News outlets picked up the story, and soon the case had become a lightning rod for debates about justice, power, and accountability in the state. Despite mounting public pressure, the initial police investigation stalled, seemingly content to classify Abhaya's death as a tragic but straightforward case. However, the community wasn't ready to accept this narrative. To them, Sister Abhaya was more than just another victim. She was a symbol of the truth they demanded. The louder the calls for justice grew, the more apparent it became that this case was far from over. As the weeks turned into months, the case was handed over to Kerala's crime branch for further investigation. But this too would prove to be just another chapter in a long and complicated journey. For behind every question lay more secrets, and behind every answer, another layer of doubt. What had really happened to Sister Abhaya? Who was responsible for her death, and why were the authorities so eager to dismiss it? These questions would remain unanswered for years, but the fight for justice was only just beginning. In the days following Sister Abhaya's death, the convent returned to its routine on the surface, but the air was heavy with unease. For many, the explanations offered by the authorities seemed too convenient, the conclusions too rushed. The initial whispers of doubt grew louder as journalists, activists, and concerned citizens began to question the narrative. How could a young, devout nun suddenly end her life without any apparent warning? And why did the investigation seem so incomplete? One man who refused to let the case fade into obscurity was activist Joan Punyaparakil. Known for his unrelenting pursuit of justice, Joan was deeply disturbed by the discrepancies surrounding Abhaya's death. He believed the initial police investigation had been both careless and compromised, failing to address the troubling signs of foul play. Joan formed an action committee dedicated to uncovering the truth, rallying support from the community, and demanding a deeper investigation. As Joan's efforts gained traction, the media began to take notice. In the early 1990s, Kerala's press was beginning to wield its power to hold authorities accountable, and the case of Sister Abhaya became headline news. Front pages were filled with questions the police had yet to answer. What caused the bruises on her body? Why were her clothes and personal belongings destroyed so quickly after her death? And why was the convent so silent, unwilling to share details that could shed light on the tragedy? The media's involvement turned Sister Abhaya's death into a statewide controversy. Reporters interviewed locals, former convent residents, and anyone who might have insight into what had happened that night. Speculation ran rampant, with theories ranging from an accidental fall into the well to a deliberate cover-up involving powerful figures within the church. Every article, every broadcast fueled public outrage and kept the story alive in the minds of Keralites. The pressure soon became too much for the local police to handle. Faced with mounting scrutiny, they handed the case over to Kerala's crime branch in April 1992. This move was meant to restore public confidence, but instead it only deepened the mystery. The crime branch's investigation dragged on for months, with little progress to show for it. When their final report concluded that Sister Abhaya's death was a suicide, the public's frustration boiled over. Joan and his action committee rejected the findings outright, as did much of Kerala's population. Activists organized protests demanding the case be reopened and investigated by an independent agency. The media continued its relentless coverage, exposing flaws in the crime branch's methods and raising questions about possible interference from influential figures. This relentless pressure eventually forced the authorities to hand the case over to India's premier investigative agency, the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI. With the CBI now in charge, hopes were high that justice would finally be served. But even as investigators began their work, they encountered the same obstacles that had plagued earlier efforts: missing evidence, uncooperative witnesses, and an undercurrent of fear that hinted at something much larger at play. Suspicion grew that powerful forces were working behind the scenes to suppress the truth. The media and activists played a critical role during this time, refusing to let the case slip into obscurity. Their persistence ensured that every new development, or lack thereof, was scrutinized and questioned. Journalists exposed inconsistencies in official reports, while activists organized rallies and petitions to keep public attention on the case. Sister Abhaya's name became synonymous with the fight for justice in Kerala, a symbol of resistance against corruption and complacency. Despite these efforts, the CBI's initial investigation hit a dead end, with no conclusive answers to what had happened to Sister Abhaya. This led to a shocking revelation in 1994 when CBI officer Varghese P. Thomas held a press conference and claimed he had been pressured to declare the case a suicide. His decision to resign rather than compromise his integrity sent shockwaves through Kerala and reignited public outrage. Thomas's revelations highlighted the immense challenges facing those seeking justice for Sister Abhaya. The case was no longer just about a young nun's tragic death. It was about exposing the systemic failures and hidden agendas that allowed such a crime to remain unsolved. Through it all, the media and activists kept the story alive, ensuring that Sister Abhaya would not be forgotten and that the fight for justice would continue. With the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, taking over Sister Abhaya's case, hope reignited among those who had been fighting tirelessly for the truth. The CBI's reputation as India's top investigative agency gave the public confidence that justice was finally within reach. But what unfolded next was a labyrinth of twists, failures, and revelations that only deepened the mystery. The CBI began by retracing the events of that fateful night. Investigators interviewed witnesses, revisited the convent, and analyzed the scant physical evidence that remained. One of their most controversial moves was conducting dummy experiments to determine whether Sister Abhaya could have fallen into the well accidentally. Using a doll of her size and weight, they recreated various scenarios, observing how injuries might align with her body's condition. But these experiments raised more questions than answers. The injuries on Abhaya's head and body didn't match any plausible scenario of an accidental fall. For many, this was the first definitive sign that foul play was involved. Despite these findings, the investigation faced significant obstacles. Much of the crucial evidence had either been destroyed or mishandled early on. Sister Abhaya's clothes had been burned, her personal items discarded, and even her diary was missing. The convent staff remained tight-lipped, and key witnesses seemed unwilling or afraid to come forward. Yet the CBI persisted, determined to uncover what truly happened. Then came a shocking twist in 1994. A senior CBI officer, Varghese P. Thomas, held an unprecedented press conference, publicly alleging that he had been pressured to declare the case a suicide. Thomas's resignation from the agency sent shockwaves across Kerala. His statement hinted at a powerful cover-up, suggesting that influential individuals were working behind the scenes to derail the investigation. The revelation sparked outrage, reigniting protests and media scrutiny. The case, already controversial, now took on a darker tone. Who was exerting this pressure? Why were they so intent on silencing the truth? And most importantly, who stood to gain from labeling Sister Abhaya's death as a suicide? As the CBI pressed on, they uncovered whispers of scandals involving the convent. Rumors swirled about inappropriate relationships, secret alliances, and tensions within the religious community. These rumors led investigators to focus on a few key individuals: Father Thomas Couture, Father Jose Putrikail, and Sister Sephi, who were believed to have been present at the convent on the night of Abhaya's death. Their names would resurface repeatedly in the years to come, becoming central figures in the unfolding drama. The CBI's efforts, however, were met with relentless opposition. Witnesses who initially supported the investigation began retracting their statements. Some claimed they had been coerced into speaking, while others cited fear for their safety. Even more troubling, evidence surfaced that some witnesses had been bribed or intimidated into silence. These tactics painted a grim picture of the lengths to which certain parties would go to keep the truth buried. Adding to the chaos was the tampering of critical evidence. In one particularly alarming incident, the narco-analysis test recordings of the main suspects were found to have been edited multiple times. These tests, meant to elicit truth through subconscious responses, could have been pivotal in cracking the case. Instead, their tampering raised questions about the integrity of the investigation and deepened suspicions of a conspiracy. By 1996, the CBI submitted a report stating that Sister Abhaya's death was likely a murder, but admitted they had insufficient evidence to identify the culprits. This inconclusive result infuriated activists and the public, who had placed their faith in the agency. Protests erupted once again, with demands for the case to be reopened. The mounting pressure forced the CBI to reassign the case to a new team, marking yet another chapter in this seemingly endless pursuit of justice. Over the next several years, the agency worked tirelessly to rebuild the case from the ground up. They re-interviewed witnesses, reanalyzed evidence, and followed every lead, no matter how small. By 1999, the new team reached a decisive conclusion. Sister Abhaya's death was a murder, and the injuries on her body were deliberate acts of violence. This breakthrough brought renewed focus to the three primary suspects. Investigators unearthed testimonies from neighbors and a surprising new witness, a petty thief named Adaka Raju, whose account would soon turn the case on its head. But even as the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place, the forces working against the investigation grew stronger. It became clear that uncovering the truth about Sister Abhaya's death wasn't just a matter of solving a murder. It was a battle against a powerful and deeply entrenched system determined to keep its secrets hidden. The case of Sister Abhaya had already become a tangled web of suspicion, cover-ups, and power plays by the time a surprising new figure emerged, a petty thief named Adaka Raju. His testimony would not only revive the stalled investigation, but also alter the trajectory of the case in ways no one could have anticipated. Raju was far from the kind of person you'd expect to play a pivotal role in a murder mystery. In 1992, he was an ordinary thief who stole scrap materials like copper wires and rods to sell for money. His nights were spent slipping into places unnoticed, his crimes calculated to avoid confrontation. But on the night of March 27, 1992, his routine was disrupted by something he couldn't forget, no matter how much he tried. That night, Raju sneaked into the St. Pius X convent under the cover of darkness, intent on stealing lightning rods from the roof. As he moved quietly through the premises, something unusual caught his attention. Near the convent kitchen, he saw two priests, Father Thomas Couture and Father Jose Putrakail, and a nun, Sister Sephi, in what he described as a compromising position. Shocked and confused, Raju froze, realizing that he had stumbled onto something far more dangerous than a theft in progress. What Raju witnessed next would haunt him for years. He claimed he saw a violent altercation between the three and Sister Abhaya, who had apparently walked in on them. According to Raju, Sister Sephi grabbed a blunt object, a kitchen axe, and struck Abhaya on the head, rendering her unconscious. In a frantic attempt to cover up the crime, the trio dragged Abhaya's body to the well and dumped her lifeless form into the water. For years, Raju kept this chilling secret to himself. How could he tell anyone without implicating himself in his own crimes? Moreover, he feared the consequences of exposing powerful individuals tied to the church. But as the case dragged on, with no resolution in sight, Raju finally came forward. His decision wasn't easy. He risked his freedom, his safety, and his reputation, knowing he would face severe scrutiny. When Raju approached the authorities with his story, his account initially shocked investigators. But instead of being hailed as a whistleblower, Raju found himself accused of the murder. The police crafted a simplistic narrative. Raju, they claimed, had broken into the convent to steal, encountered Sister Abhaya, and killed her in a panic before dumping her body in the well. Arrested and held for 58 days, Raju was allegedly tortured and pressured to confess to a crime he insisted he didn't commit. Despite threats, bribes, and relentless coercion, Raju stood firm. He refused to take the fall for a murder he hadn't committed. He maintained his original story, naming Father Couture, Father Jose, and Sister Sephi as the real culprits. His unwavering honesty turned the tide of public opinion. Activists and media outlets rallied behind him, highlighting the blatant attempts to scapegoat a poor man to protect powerful individuals. Raju's testimony was corroborated by other clues that investigators had uncovered over the years. A neighbor of the convent recalled seeing Father Couture's scooter parked near the premises on the night of the murder. Though the witness initially supported this claim, he later retracted his statement, citing pressure from unknown parties. Even more damning was the fact that Raju's description of the events aligned eerily well with the injuries detailed in the autopsy report, which included head trauma consistent with a blunt weapon. As Raju's story gained credibility, the CBI zeroed in on the three suspects. Father Couture, Father Jose, and Sister Sephi were subjected to narco-analysis tests designed to extract subconscious truths. But even these tests became a battleground of manipulation. The CDs containing the test results were later found to have been tampered with, edited multiple times to obscure key findings. Despite the tampering, fragments of the original recordings pointed to a chilling conspiracy. The trio had indeed been involved in Abhaya's death and the subsequent cover-up. Raju's courage in coming forward marked a turning point in the investigation. His testimony revitalized a case that had been languishing for years, forcing the authorities to confront the uncomfortable truths they had long tried to avoid. For the public, Raju became an unlikely hero, a petty thief whose conscience outweighed his fear, a man who risked everything to ensure that Sister Abhaya's story wouldn't be silenced. But even with Raju's testimony, the road to justice was far from straightforward. The powerful forces protecting the accused continued to create hurdles, ensuring that every step forward came at a cost. Yet, thanks to Raju's bravery, the walls of secrecy surrounding Sister Abhaya's death began to crack, letting the light of truth shine through. As the case against Father Thomas Couture, Father Jose Putrikail, and Sister Sephi began to take shape, it seemed that justice for Sister Abhaya was finally within reach. But just as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, a new wave of shocking revelations brought the investigation to a grinding halt. Evidence critical to the case, testimonies, recordings, and forensic reports, was found to have been tampered with or mysteriously vanished. These developments cast a dark shadow over the investigation, suggesting that someone, or some group, was working tirelessly to bury the truth. The first major blow came with the tampering of the narco-analysis tests conducted on the three suspects. Narco-analysis, a controversial method where subjects are placed under a semi-hypnotic state to extract subconscious truths, had been performed to gather direct evidence against the accused. The results, recorded on CDs, were meant to be airtight. But when the CDs were reviewed during the trial, they were riddled with inconsistencies. Edits had been made, over 30 times on one recording alone, and key portions appeared to be missing. The tampering raised an unsettling question. Who had the power and access to manipulate such critical evidence? Investigators attempted to retrieve the original recordings, but those too had mysteriously disappeared. Even more disturbingly, the edited recordings were leaked to a local TV station in Kerala before they could be properly presented in court. The leaked footage caused a media frenzy, but it also further muddied the waters, as it was unclear whether the aired recordings had been altered. Adding to the suspicion was the destruction of key physical evidence early in the case. Sister Abhaya's clothes, which could have provided vital forensic insights, had been burned shortly after her autopsy. Her personal items, including a diary that could have shed light on her thoughts and activities in the days leading up to her death, were nowhere to be found. Critics accused the local police of gross negligence, or worse, deliberate sabotage, to protect influential figures tied to the case. Even witnesses who could have strengthened the case began to change their stories. A neighbor who initially reported seeing Father Couture's scooter outside the convent on the night of the murder later retracted his statement, claiming he had been pressured to remain silent. Another witness who had seen suspicious activity near the well admitted to being intimidated by unknown parties. The pattern was clear. Anyone with information that could implicate the accused faced relentless pressure to back down. The defense team for the accused capitalized on these inconsistencies, painting the investigation as flawed and unreliable. They argued that the tampered evidence and shifting witness testimonies were proof that the case lacked credibility. But for activists and journalists closely following the case, these developments only confirmed their worst fears. A powerful conspiracy was at work, determined to protect the accused at all costs. The role of the church in the alleged cover-up became a focal point of public scrutiny. Activists pointed to the influence the church wielded in Kerala, both socially and politically, as a potential factor in the delays and disruptions in the investigation. Allegations surfaced that high-ranking clergy members were pressuring authorities to bury the case to avoid scandal. These claims, though difficult to prove, added another layer of complexity to an already convoluted investigation. Despite the mounting obstacles, the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, refused to abandon the case. They turned to advanced forensic techniques, attempting to reconstruct the events of that fateful night through what little evidence remained. They also brought in fresh witnesses, hoping to bypass the web of intimidation surrounding the case. Every small breakthrough was met with another roadblock, but the investigators pressed on, driven by the belief that justice for Sister Abhaya was still possible. The public, meanwhile, remained captivated by the case. Media coverage was relentless, with every new development dominating headlines. Activists continued to organize rallies and petition the courts, ensuring that the case stayed in the public eye. For many in Kerala, the fight for justice had become about more than just Sister Abhaya. It was a battle against corruption, power, and the silencing of truth. By the late 1990s, the case had become one of the most notorious in India, a symbol of the country's struggle to hold powerful institutions accountable. The evidence tampering, though a devastating blow, only strengthened the resolve of those fighting for the truth. With each setback, the questions grew louder. Why was so much effort being put into obstructing justice? And who was behind it all? These questions would linger for years, but the case was far from over. Despite the obstacles, the walls of secrecy were beginning to crumble. The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered, and the world was watching. By the late 1990s, the investigation into Sister Abhaya's death had become a battle of endurance. The tampered evidence, destroyed forensic materials, and silenced witnesses painted a picture of a case deliberately stalled by unseen forces. But despite these obstacles, the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, made a breakthrough in 1999 that brought shocking revelations to light. The truth about what happened to Sister Abhaya began to emerge, and the details were darker than anyone had imagined. The CBI's fresh team of investigators started by re-examining testimonies and forensic reports. This time they focused on inconsistencies in the narrative provided by key suspects, Father Thomas Cotter, Father Jose Putrikail, and Sister Sephi. Their renewed efforts led them to uncover new evidence, much of it aligning with the testimony of the unlikely hero of this case, the petty thief, Adaka Raju. Raju's account of that fateful night had been dismissed by some as unreliable, but the CBI found startling correlations between his story and the physical evidence. The injuries on Sister Abhaya's body, including a head wound consistent with being struck by a blunt object, matched his description of the events. Investigators also confirmed the presence of the suspects at the convent during the early hours of March 27, 1992. A crucial detail they had tried to deny. The CBI's most damning discovery came during their analysis of Sister Sephi's actions in the aftermath of the crime. Forensic experts revealed that she had undergone a medical procedure shortly after the murder, one that suggested an attempt to conceal a compromising relationship. This detail, paired with testimonies about the suspect's movements that night, painted a clear motive for the murder. Sister Abhaya had accidentally walked in on something she wasn't supposed to see. The investigators reconstructed the chilling sequence of events. In the early hours of March 27th, Abhaya had woken up to study. Feeling drowsy, she headed to the convent's kitchen to splash water on her face. There, she stumbled upon Father Couture, Father Jose, and Sister Sephi in what was described as a compromising situation. Startled, she likely reacted in shock, unintentionally threatening to expose them. Panicked, the trio attacked her to silence her. Sister Sephi, in a moment of desperation, grabbed a blunt object, a kitchen axe, and struck Abhaya on the head. The blow rendered her unconscious, but still alive. In a hurried attempt to cover their tracks, the trio carried her to the convent's well and threw her in, ensuring she drowned. These findings sent shockwaves through Kerala and the entire nation. The idea that such a heinous crime could be committed and covered up for nearly a decade was unthinkable. The suspects, members of the religious community who were supposed to uphold the highest moral standards, were now accused of one of the most chilling crimes in recent history. But the revelations didn't stop there. As the investigation progressed, the CBI uncovered more evidence of a coordinated effort to shield the suspects. High-ranking members of the church had allegedly intervened to protect their own, pressuring witnesses to change their stories and influencing the destruction of key evidence. The tampered narcoanalysis recordings, the missing diary, and the hurried burial of Sister Abhaya all pointed to a systematic cover-up designed to derail the investigation. The public response was explosive. Protests erupted across Kerala, with activists and ordinary citizens demanding accountability, not just from the accused, but also from the institutions that had protected them. Media outlets ran scathing reports exposing the corruption and complicity that had plagued the case for years. Sister Abhaya became a symbol of justice denied, her story sparking outrage and calls for systemic reform. Despite the mounting evidence, the road to justice was far from over. The suspects maintained their innocence, backed by powerful allies who continued to obstruct the investigation. Trials were delayed, witnesses disappeared, and even investigators faced threats. But for the first time in years, there was hope. The truth about what happened to Sister Abhaya was no longer hidden, and the public's determination to see justice served had never been stronger. As the case moved closer to trial, the stakes grew higher. Would the evidence hold up in court? Could the suspects finally be brought to justice after years of evasion? And perhaps most haunting of all, why had it taken nearly a decade for the truth to emerge? These questions loomed large, setting the stage for the final chapters of one of India's most infamous murder cases. By the early 2000s, the case of Sister Abhaya had become one of India's longest-running and most controversial murder investigations. With damning evidence now pointing to Father Thomas Couture, Father Jose Putrikail, and Sister Sephi, the fight for justice seemed to have gained momentum. But the road ahead was anything but smooth. Every step toward accountability was met with delays, obstructions, and attempts to discredit the investigation. What unfolded next was a grueling legal battle that would test the patience and resolve of everyone involved. The Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, filed its first charge sheet in 2008, nearly 16 years after Sister Abhaya's death. It formally accused Father Couture, Father Jose, and Sister Sephi of murder, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy. According to the CBI, Sister Abhaya had inadvertently walked in on an illicit meeting between the three, leading to her brutal murder and the subsequent cover-up. The charge sheet was a critical milestone, but it was far from the end of the story. The accused mounted a fierce defense, backed by powerful allies who were determined to clear their names. Their lawyers argued that the evidence presented by the CBI was circumstantial at best, pointing to gaps in the timeline and inconsistencies in witness statements. They also questioned the reliability of the narcoanalysis tests, which had been tampered with before their presentation in court. The defense team painted the accused as victims of a witch hunt, claiming that the CBI had bowed to public pressure and fabricated the case against them. Meanwhile, the public's frustration grew. The delays in the legal process were excruciating, with hearings postponed repeatedly due to procedural issues and appeals from the defense. Witnesses crucial to the case either disappeared or retracted their statements, citing fear and intimidation. Even the activists and journalists who had tirelessly championed the case began to feel the weight of the endless delays. Yet the support for Sister Abhaya's cause never wavered. For the people of Kerala, this was no longer just about a single tragedy. It was a fight against corruption, abuse of power, and the silencing of truth. The years between 2008 and 2020 were marked by a series of legal twists and turns. Court after court reviewed the evidence with varying degrees of scrutiny. At times, it seemed as though the case would collapse under the weight of its complexity. Yet, the CBI persisted. Their investigators continued to gather new evidence, re-examine old findings, and rebuild their case from the ground up. Slowly but surely, the cracks in the defense's narrative began to show. One of the turning points came in 2018, when a key witness re-emerged. This witness, who had previously been too afraid to speak out, provided a detailed account that aligned closely with the CBI's theory. Their testimony, combined with forensic evidence and Raju's steadfast account, gave the prosecution the edge it needed to move the case forward. Public support also played a crucial role, with activists and media outlets keeping the pressure on authorities to ensure the case remained a priority. Finally, in December 2020, 28 years after Sister Abhaya's death, the Kerala court delivered its verdict. Father Thomas Kotur and Sister Sephi were found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and destruction of evidence. Father Jose Putrikayil, who had been named in earlier investigations, was acquitted due to a lack of direct evidence against him. The court sentenced the guilty parties to life imprisonment and imposed a fine of 5 lakh rupees each. The verdict marked the end of a decades-long battle for justice. For Sister Abhaya's family, activists, and supporters, it was a bittersweet moment. While the convictions provided a sense of closure, the long delays and systemic failures that plagued the case left lingering questions about the justice system's ability to hold powerful individuals accountable. The case of Sister Abhaya was more than just a murder mystery. It was a reflection of the resilience of truth in the face of overwhelming opposition. It revealed the lengths to which individuals and institutions would go to protect their own, but also the power of persistence, courage, and collective action. Thanks to the determination of investigators, activists, and an unlikely hero in Adaka Raju, one of India's most chilling murder cases was finally laid to rest. But as the dust settled, one question remained. How many more stories like Sister Abhaya's are still waiting to be told? The answer may never be known, but her story will serve as a stark reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, can never truly be silenced. The conclusion of Sister Abhaya's case in December 2020 brought an end to a saga that had haunted Kerala for nearly 3 decades. For those who had followed her story, the verdict was a bittersweet triumph. While justice had finally been served, the long delays, destroyed evidence, and persistent obstruction left a bitter taste. Sister Abhaya's death, once buried under layers of secrecy, had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of truth and the unyielding determination of those who refused to let her voice be silenced. The case highlighted critical flaws in India's justice system. Evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and systemic delays exposed the vulnerabilities of investigations, particularly when powerful institutions and individuals were involved. For activists like Joan Punyaparakil and whistleblowers like Adaka Raju, the fight for justice was a long and lonely battle, one that required immense courage in the face of threats and intimidation. Their persistence, however, proved that even the most deeply buried truths can rise to the surface. For Kerala, the case left a deep scar. The involvement of religious figures in such a heinous crime and the subsequent cover-up challenged the faith of many in the sanctity of the institutions they once trusted. The verdict forced a reckoning within the Church with demands for greater transparency and accountability. It also sparked conversations about the power dynamics in religious communities, where silence is often enforced at the cost of justice. Sister Abhaya's story also served as a reminder of the critical role of media and activism in holding institutions accountable. Without the relentless coverage by journalists and the unwavering efforts of activists, her death might have been dismissed as just another unexplained tragedy. Instead, it became a rallying cry for justice, inspiring others to speak out and demand accountability. But the legacy of the case goes beyond Kerala. It resonates with anyone who has ever sought justice in the face of overwhelming odds. Sister Abhaya's name is now a symbol of resilience, her story a cautionary tale of how power can corrupt and how truth, no matter how delayed, will eventually emerge. As we reflect on her life and the decades-long fight for justice, one thing becomes clear. The pursuit of truth is never easy, but it is always worth it. Sister Abhaya's story reminds us that while justice may be delayed, it is never denied to those who fight with unwavering determination. Her silence was weaponized against her, but her story became louder than anyone could have imagined. It echoes as a beacon for all who seek to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And so the well that once concealed her body now stands as a reminder of the darkness that once engulfed her story, and of the light that finally broke through. The fight for justice doesn't end here. It continues in the stories we tell, in the courage we show, and in the systems we strive to change. Sister Abhaya's story may have concluded, but its impact will be felt for generations to come.